On September 12, 1857, a single ship sank off the coast of North Carolina. It carried 30,000 pounds of California gold, worth about $500 million today. Within hours of the news reaching New York, banks began to fail. Within weeks, the entire American economy was in freefall. Within months, the crisis had spread to Europe, South America, and Asia. One ship, one storm, global collapse. But here's what they don't teach you. The ship didn't cause the crisis. It was just the match that lit a fuse already soaked in speculation, fraud, and a financial system so interconnected that nobody understood how fragile it had become. The Panic of 1857 was the first truly global economic crisis, a preview of every crash that would follow, from 1929 to 2008. And the terrifying truth is that we learned almost nothing from it.
To understand how everything fell apart, you need to understand how everything came together in the first place. In 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in California. Within months, hundreds of thousands of people from around the world descended on the American West in one of history's greatest migrations. They called it the Gold Rush, but it was really something more profound: the sudden injection of massive wealth into a global economy that wasn't prepared for it. Between 1848 and 1857, California miners extracted over $550 million in gold, an almost incomprehensible sum for that era. That gold didn't stay in California.
It flowed east to New York, then across the Atlantic to London, Paris, and beyond. It financed railroads across America, factories in Britain, and imperial expansion worldwide. For the first time in human history, the world economy was truly connected. Telegraph lines stretched across continents. Steamships crossed oceans in weeks instead of months. Banks in New York could extend credit based on gold sitting in San Francisco. British investors could buy shares in American railroads without ever seeing them. European manufacturers depended on American cotton, which depended on slave labor, which depended on credit from northern banks. It was a miracle of progress and interconnection. It was also a house of cards. Because here's what nobody wanted to admit. The system had become so complex, so interdependent, that no one actually understood it anymore. A farmer in Ohio could lose his land because of a bank failure in New York, triggered by a speculation collapse in railroad stocks caused by overbuilding in the Midwest, financed by British capital, secured by California gold. The machine had become too big, too fast, and too fragile, and everyone was too busy making money to notice. If California gold was the fuel of the 1850s boom, American railroads were the engine. And like every boom built on borrowed money, it was heading for a cliff. In the early 1850s, railroad construction exploded. Between 1850 and 1857, America laid over 20,000 miles of new track, more than triple what existed before.
Towns competed to attract rail lines. States offered subsidies. Investors poured money into railroad companies with names that promised grandeur: the Atlantic and Great Western, the Illinois Central, the Ohio, and Mississippi. But here's the problem. Most of these railroads were built not because they were needed, but because they were profitable for the people building them. Railroad promoters would survey a route, sell bonds and stocks to eager investors, pocket huge fees for construction, and move on to the next project. It didn't matter if the railroad actually served a real economic purpose. It didn't matter if there was enough freight or passengers to make it viable. What mattered was that the paper, the stocks and bonds, could be sold. Sound familiar? It should. This is the same playbook as the dot-com bubble of the 1990s, where companies went public with no revenue and investors bought them anyway. It's the same as the housing bubble of the 2000s, where mortgages were bundled and sold regardless of whether borrowers could actually pay. The Panic of 1857 was history's first great infrastructure bubble, and it revealed a truth that would echo through every crash since. When money is cheap and optimism is high, people stop asking hard questions. They build first and think later. And the bill always comes due. By 1857, Dozens of American railroads were insolvent, surviving only by borrowing more to pay interest on previous debt. Their bonds traded in London, Paris, and Amsterdam, meaning when they collapsed, the losses would be felt worldwide. All that was needed was a trigger. And in August 1857, it came, not from the railroads, but from the very gold that had made the boom possible. The SS Central America was a side-wheel steamship that ran a regular route from Panama to New York, carrying passengers and cargo, including huge shipments of California gold. This wasn't just any gold. It was the lifeblood of the American banking system. Here's how it worked. Gold mined in California would be shipped to Panama, transported overland across the isthmus, then loaded onto ships like the Central America for the journey to New York. Once it arrived, banks would use that gold as reserves to back their loans and currency. The whole system depended on that gold arriving safely and on time. On September 3rd, 1857, the Central America left Panama with 578 passengers and crew and 30,000 pounds of gold worth $1.5 million then, over $500 million today. 8 days into the voyage, the ship encountered a Category 2 hurricane off the Carolina coast. For 2 days, the crew and passengers fought to save the ship. They bailed water, threw cargo overboard, and desperately tried to keep the engines running. But on September 12th, the Central America sank, taking 425 people and all that gold to the bottom of the Atlantic. When news reached New York, the financial world froze. Banks that had been counting on that gold to meet obligations. Depositors who heard about the disaster rushed to withdraw their money, fearing their banks would fail. And those banks, already stretched thin by railroad speculation and overextended credit, began to topple. The Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company, one of the largest financial institutions in America, collapsed on August 24th, even before the ship sank. The Central America's loss just accelerated what was already inevitable. Within weeks, over 1,400 state banks suspended operations. The New York Stock Exchange lost over 40% of its value in a matter of months. Railroads defaulted on their bonds. Factories closed. Unemployment in northern cities reached 25%. And because the financial system was now global, the panic spread. This is where the Panic of 1857 becomes a blueprint for every global crisis since, the cascading failure across borders. British investors held massive amounts of American railroad bonds. When those railroads defaulted, British banks took enormous losses. The Bank of England, trying to stem the bleeding, raised interest rates sharply, making credit more expensive and choking off investment across Europe. In Hamburg, Germany, dozens of merchant houses that traded heavily with America went bankrupt. In France, industrial production ground to a halt as demand for exports disappeared. In Brazil and Argentina, commodity prices collapsed because American buyers vanished overnight. Even the Crimean War, a brutal conflict between Russia and an alliance of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire, had recently ended, leaving European economies already weakened. The American crisis turned a difficult situation into a disaster. For the first time, people realized that national borders meant nothing in a world of telegraphs, steamships, and international finance. A railroad bankruptcy in Illinois could destroy a bank in London. A ship sinking in the Atlantic could topple a merchant house in Hamburg. This was globalization's dark side. Interconnection without understanding, complexity without control, risk that nobody could see until it was too late. The Panic of 1857 was the moment the modern world discovered it had built a machine it couldn't turn off. As always in a financial crisis, not everyone suffered equally. In the North, industrial workers were hit hardest. Factories closed, wages plummeted, and families that had been middle class found themselves destitute. The urban poor faced starvation as food prices rose while incomes disappeared. But here's the cruel irony. The South barely felt at all. Why? Because the South's economy wasn't based on railroads, banks, or industrial speculation. It was based on cotton, and European demand for cotton remained strong. Southern planters, watching northern cities burn financially, saw it as proof that their slave-based agricultural system was superior to northern industrial capitalism. This economic divergence would deepen the sectional divide that led to the Civil War just 4 years later. The Panic of 1857 didn't just break the economy, it broke the political consensus holding the nation together. Meanwhile, the wealthy found ways to profit. When banks failed, land prices collapsed, and assets were sold at fire sale prices. Those with cash could buy at a fraction of value. J.P. Morgan's father, Junius Morgan, used the panic to acquire distressed railroad bonds that would later make the family fortune. This is the pattern that repeats in every crash. Crises transfer wealth from the many to the few, from those who are forced to sell to those who can afford to wait and buy. The Panic of 1857 was no different. Economic collapses don't just destroy wealth. They destroy trust, stability, and political order. And the Panic of 1857 set the stage for the deadliest war in American history. In the North, the panic discredited the Democratic Party, which had been in power and was seen as too cozy with banks and speculators. It energized a young Republican Party that promised economic reform, protective tariffs, and government investment in infrastructure. One of those Republicans was Abraham Lincoln. In the 1858 debates with Stephen Douglas, Lincoln made economic arguments as much as moral ones. He spoke about the dignity of free labor, the corruption of the financial system, and the need for a government that served ordinary people rather than speculators. The panic had created an audience ready to hear that message. In the South, the crisis confirmed planters' belief that they didn't need the North. They saw northern banks fail, while southern cotton plantations remained profitable. They convinced themselves that cotton was king, that Europe would always need them, and that secession was economically viable. They were catastrophically wrong. But the Panic of 1857 gave them the confidence to try. When Lincoln won the presidency in 1860, southern states seceded. The Civil War began. And while the war was fundamentally about slavery, the economic and political fault lines exposed by the Panic of 1857 made compromise impossible. Financial crises don't just hurt people economically. They reshape politics, destroy institutions, and create the conditions for conflict. The Panic of 1857 proved that markets and politics are never separate. They feed on each other, amplify each other, and destroy each other. After the panic subsided, there were investigations, reforms, and promises that it would never happen again. Some lessons were learned. The federal government began to recognize the need for a more stable banking system, though it would take the Civil War and the creation of national banks to make real progress. The railroad bubble burst, and for a time, speculation cooled. Investors became more cautious about infrastructure projects built on hype rather than real demand. But the deeper lessons were ignored. No one questioned whether an economic system dependent on constant credit expansion was sustainable. No one asked if global interconnection without regulation was wise. No one wondered if a financial system so complex that its own architects couldn't understand it might be dangerous. Instead, they rebuilt the machine and made it bigger. By the 1870s, the railroads were booming again. By the 1890s, another global panic would strike. By 1907, another banking crisis. By 1920, the Great Depression. And in 2008, a crisis sparked by mortgage-backed securities, complex financial instruments that bundled debt and risk in ways nobody fully understood, proved that nothing had fundamentally changed. The Panic of 1857 was the first domino, but the dominoes just keep falling. So what should we take away from 60 years ago? First, complexity is not strength. The more interconnected a system becomes, the more vulnerable it is to cascading failure. A ship sinks, and banks collapse on another continent. A housing bubble pops in California, and pension funds fail in Iceland. The global financial system is more interconnected today than ever, and that means the next crisis will spread faster and hit harder. Second, speculation always ends badly. Whether it's railroads in the 1850s, tech stocks in the 1990s, or meme stocks today, the pattern is the same. When prices rise not because of real value, but because of borrowed money and hype, the crash is inevitable. The only question is when. Third, crises are transfers, not destruction. Wealth doesn't vanish in a panic. It changes hands. From debtors to creditors, from the desperate to the patient, from the many to the few. Every collapse is an opportunity for those with cash and courage. That's not a moral statement. It's just history. And fourth, no one is coming to save you. Governments, central banks, and financial institutions will protect themselves first. If you're waiting for the system to keep you safe, you're waiting for something that has never existed. The Panic of 1857 showed that even gold, the hardest, most trusted form of money, can fail to protect you if it's at the bottom of the ocean. What matters is not what you own, but what you can access when everything falls apart. On September 12, 1857, a ship called the SS Central America sank in a hurricane. 425 people drowned. 30,000 pounds of gold vanished into the Atlantic. And the first global financial crisis began. It wasn't the gold that caused the collapse. It was a system built on speculation, interconnection, and blind faith that nothing could go wrong. That system hasn't changed. It's just gotten bigger. The next ship is already sinking. The only question is whether you'll see it before the water reaches you. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past never lies. You just have to listen.